Hey there, deep divers. Ready to dive in for another deep dive.
Always.
Okay. Today, we're turning our attention to Dumaguete City
Okay.
in the Philippines.
Yeah.
You've been sending in some really fascinating sources about what it's actually like to live there as an expat.
Right.
And the picture seems a little more complicated than just like retirement paradise that you often hear about online.
Right.
Some of the sources you sent even mentioned some potential downsides like power outages and inflated prices.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we often see this disconnect
Yeah,
between like the online hype and the actual experience on the ground.
absolutely.
And I think it's really important to consider both the good and the bad,
Yeah.
especially when you're making a decision as big as like relocating your life
Mm-hmm.
long term.
Right. And especially long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of, really getting into the nitty gritty, one YouTube channel you shared really caught my eye because
Okay.
they seem pretty committed to showing the unvarnished truth
Right.
about living in Dumaguete.
Yeah. And you even dug up a transcript from one of their videos. It's called The Truth About Dumaguete, Philippines, Pros and Cons.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a gold mine.
Yeah. Firsthand accounts are so valuable, right?
Woo!
They give you that like on the ground perspective that you just don't get from those glossy brochures.
Absolutely not. And it was really interesting to see this mix, right?
Yeah.
There are these really positive comments about how friendly the locals are, the
Yeah.
university town atmosphere, and the food scene sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But then there were some pretty significant buts.
Right. And it's those buts, I think, that are really important to pay attention to because
Totally.
it's all about balanced expectations,
Right.
right? Like
Mm.
those positives are great, but they don't erase
Right.
the possibility of some downsides too.
And one thing that kept popping up was the power and water outages.
Okay.
Like one commenter even talked about how trying to enjoy their morning coffee without power
Oh, no.
had become a regular part of their routine.
And I was just thinking, like, imagine that, especially during a heat wave.
Right. I mean, it really speaks to the realities of the infrastructure in the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
Which, has historically faced some underinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be tough to keep up with that rapid population growth.
Yeah.
And so these interruptions to essential services, unfortunately, can happen.
Not exactly the idyllic image we often associate with a tropical paradise, right?
Right, right.
And speaking of things that could disrupt that idyllic image, let's talk about healthcare.
Okay.
Because the comments on that were really all over the place.
Yeah.
Some people were saying it was almost acceptable, and then others were expressing concern about having to go elsewhere
Wow.
for any kind of serious treatment.
It's a big deal for anyone, but especially, I think, for individuals who have pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
They really have to consider their comfort level with the healthcare system
Mm-hmm.
because it may not have the same standards or accessibility that they're used to in their home country.
Right.
Like if you need a specialized procedure, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it could be much pricier or harder to come by in Dumaguete
Right.
compared to, say, the United States.
And even if you can afford it, like you said, the logistics of it,
Exactly.
a whole other thing
Absolutely
to have to
right.
travel for that.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer of complexity to it.
It really is about, evaluating your risk tolerance
Mm-hmm.
and your priorities when you're making such a big change.
Absolutely.
And this is where things took a bit of a turn in the comments section
Oh.
because several people were saying that foreigners are sometimes taken advantage of,
Oh, no.
especially with things like rent.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. But it's often a byproduct, I think, of those economic disparities.
Oh.
And when you have an influx of foreigners to a place that's known for being affordable,
Yeah.
Demand goes up, prices go up,
Mm,
and sometimes locals get priced out.
right.
And that can create opportunities for exploitation, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Right.
But in this case, it's the foreigner with the, perceived wealth
Exactly.
who
Yeah.
becomes the target.
Exactly.
And this isn't unique to Dumaguete either.
Okay.
This is something we see in a lot of places around the world that are experiencing these influxes of,
Yeah.
wealth and tourism.
It's a pattern.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The comments also touched upon something really important about living abroad,
Okay.
navigating the social dynamics.
Yeah.
There were mentions of just different expectations surrounding things like
Mm-hmm.
casual relationships.
Yeah.
And just a need for foreigners to be really mindful of local customs.
Right. Absolutely. Cultural sensitivity and respect are so important.
So important.
Right. Because what might be acceptable or commonplace in one culture can be viewed totally differently in another.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful travelers and residents.
Yes.
Not just tourists looking for a good time,
Right.
regardless of the potential impact on the local community.
It's about recognizing that you're a guest in another culture, and you should act accordingly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here
Okay.
and talk about the cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
Because while rent in Dumaguete might seem really affordable
Yeah.
compared to some Western countries,
Right.
several commenters said that other expenses can really add up.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get fixated on one thing, like,
Yeah.
oh, the rent is lower,
Yeah.
but it's important to look at the whole picture.
The whole picture.
Yes.
It's like going to a really fancy restaurant and being shocked by the entree prices.
Right.
After you were like, oh, appetizers are really reasonable.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh.
Exactly. And in Dumaguette's case, while rent might be lower,
Yeah.
things like your groceries, transportation, entertainment can be surprisingly pricey.
Right.
Especially if you're used to Western prices.
Exactly. It all comes back to budgeting.
Yes, budgeting is key. It really highlights the importance of going beyond those glossy brochures and expat blogs
Right.
that often paint this overly rosy picture.
They do.
Yeah.
It's about really digging deeper.
Research is your best friend.
It is?
You've got to understand the local economy.
Yes.
What things actually cost.
And how far your money will actually go.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's not just about affordability and isolation.
Right.
It's about, can you actually have the quality of life that you want
Exactly.
with what you can afford?
That's the key question, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It really sounds like anyone thinking about Dumaguete has to do their homework.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough to just, fall in love with the idea of a place.
Right.
You really have to think about if the reality actually matches what you want and what you need.
And that's where, understanding your own priorities is key.
Right.
Like, what are your non-negotiables when it comes to quality of life? Is it reliable infrastructure, access to certain health care, a certain kind of social scene?
Yeah, because what might be like a little annoying for one person
Right.
could be a deal breaker for somebody else.
Absolutely.
It's all about finding that sweet spot between
Yes.
being adventurous and trying something new,
Yeah.
but also being realistic about what that actually means.
Yeah, being realistic.
Yeah.
That ties into another big thing that came up in your research.
Okay.
The potential for cultural misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Like social faux pas.
Right. We talked about this a little earlier,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's worth digging into a bit more
Yeah.
because we saw some comments in that YouTube video transcript
Yes.
that really hinted at a clash of expectations
Right.
when it came to social interactions.
Yeah.
And even like dating norms.
Yeah. And this is where that cultural sensitivity we were talking about is so important.
Oh, there you go.
Dumaguete, like a lot of places that are popular with expats,
Yeah.
it has its own like social rules. And you got to approach it with respect and a willingness to learn.
It's about recognizing that we can't just like impose our own cultural norms on another culture,
Yeah.
especially when we're guests in their country.
It's like you're learning a new language almost,
Yeah.
but instead of words, it's social cues and cultural nuances.
It really is. And just like learning any language, it takes time and effort
Mm-hmm.
and probably making some mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And this is where connecting with locals can be so helpful.
Right.
Like, look for opportunities to connect with Filipinos, whether it's language exchanges,
Yeah.
cultural events, or even just chatting with your neighbors.
Those everyday interactions.
Exactly, because the more you get to know the local culture,
Yeah.
the less likely you are to make those unintentional mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and the more enriching and respectful your experience will be.
And that actually brings us back to doing your research.
It always comes back to that.
It does,
Yeah.
because it's not just about visas and finding a place to live. It's about really understanding the culture.
Absolutely. And luckily, there are so many resources out there now
Yeah.
to help you really dig into a culture before you go.
True.
Online forums, expat blogs, documentaries, books.
Yeah.
There are tons of ways to get a feel for a place.
Yeah. Like going on a date.
Right.
You wouldn't just show up knowing nothing about the person,
I hope not.
right? So same goes for a place, especially one as rich and complex as the Philippines.
Especially a place like that, yeah.
So we've talked about realistic expectations, cultural sensitivity research,
Right.
but there's one more really crucial thing we should talk about.
What's that?
Safety,
Yeah, and this is something you really need to get info on from good sources.
right?
Not just like random stories or rumors.
Yeah, because it's easy to get caught up in the what ifs,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it's a country you're not familiar with.
Exactly. And while it's always smart to be aware of your surroundings
Oh.
and take precautions, you want to do that from a place of knowledge, not just fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners get accurate information about safety in Dumaguete?
Well, a good place to start is government websites,
Okay.
like travel advisories from your home country. Those
Yeah.
usually give a pretty objective assessment of any risks.
Right. What about local resources? Are there any organizations or websites in Dumaguete itself?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
A lot of cities with big expat communities have websites or forums where people share tips about safety,
Oh, that's great.
transportation, local services.
It's like having a direct line to people who have actually lived there.
Exactly. And those firsthand accounts, they can really add to the more general info you get from officials.
So it's about looking at safety from all angles, just like any other part of moving to a new country.
Exactly. Gather your info from different places.
Right.
Figure out your own comfort level.
Right.
Take smart precautions.
Mm-hmm.
But don't let fear make your decisions for you.
Because ultimately, knowledge is power. It really is. The more you know,
Yeah,
the better choices you can make.
absolutely.
Sounds like the big takeaway here is Dumaguete's like a lot of places. It's more than just a pretty picture, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's got layers, it's complex,
Yeah.
and it's up to each person to decide
Right.
if that lines up with what they're looking for.
It's about fit, right?
Yeah.
It's not about saying a place is good or bad.
Right.
It's about figuring out if it's right for you.
It's like trying on shoes.
Yes.
They might look amazing in the store,
Right.
but if they don't fit your feet,
Exactly.
they're not going to work out.
It's not going to work long term.
Nope.
You need that good fit.
And just like you wouldn't buy shoes without trying them on. You
Right.
shouldn't move somewhere without really trying it on for size.
Trying it on for size, exactly.
And that means more than just
Yes.
reading blogs or watching videos.
More than a quick trip.
Yeah, you really got to dig into what daily life is like there, what the culture's like,
Yeah.
what could be tough about it.
Be real about the challenges.
Yeah, ask yourself the hard questions.
Right.
Don't be afraid to challenge what you think you know, and be open to the fact that no matter how much research you do,
There are always surprises.
there are going to be surprises.
Always surprises.
That's where being able to adapt is key.
Being adaptable, for sure.
And a sense of humor doesn't hurt,
A little humor goes a long way.
right? Because you got to be able to roll with it. Find the good in the unexpected.
Exactly. You got to find the joy in it.
Yeah, because those detours
Right.
sometimes lead to the best discoveries.
They can lead you somewhere you didn't even expect.
Exactly. And, hey, maybe those discoveries help you realize that the place you thought you were set on
Yeah.
isn't actually the right fit.
It happens.
And that's okay.
It's okay to change your mind.
It's all about being open to adjusting your course.
Exactly. Life's a journey, right?
It is.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
That's a good way to put it. And that brings us back to making informed decisions.
Yes, being informed is key.
Knowing yourself what you want, what you absolutely need.
Yeah, knowing your non-negotiables.
Exactly. Because when you know that stuff,
Right.
it's easier to handle those bumps in the road.
It makes those twists and turns a little easier to navigate.
So as we wrap up our deep dive on Dumaguete, what's one thing you'd want our listeners to remember?
Don't be afraid of the complexity.
Okay.
Like, don't shy away from the challenges, the nuances.
Embrace the messiness.
Embrace the messiness, because that's where the good stuff is.
It's like picking out fruit.
Oh, yeah.
The ones that are perfect and shiny,
Right.
they might look good,
They look good on the outside.
but the ones with a little character,
yeah.
a little imperfection,
That's where the flavor is.
that's where the flavor is.
Exactly.
So embrace the richness of it all.
Embrace it all.
Look at each experience as a chance to learn, to grow, to really get to know yourself.
Yeah, and the world around you.
I love that. So well said.
Thank you.
And on that note, we'll leave everyone with that thought.
Yes.
Remember, the best adventures are the ones where you go in with your eyes open,
Open eyes, open heart,
your heart open,
open to everything.
and your mind ready for anything.
Yes.
Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Keep asking questions.
Ask all the questions.
And keep diving deep.
Dive deep.